Welcome back to my lesson. This is my friend Lauren, who's going to be helping out and acting as one of my students. In my lesson, the class will be looking at the story The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber and identify the story elements using the provided graphic organizer they would have been given in this class, and it would be on a smartboard. We're not in a classroom, but ultimately I'd like to do it on a smartboard so everyone could see everyone's questions. Lauren, as if she's one of my ELL students, was given an original copy of the story so she can follow along. Okay, class, the first story we're going to be looking at is a famous one. It was even turned into a movie. It's called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber. Have you seen this movie?
I have not.
Oh, well, perfect. I think you'll like the story. Just a little bit of background. The story is about a guy who spends more time in the heroic daydreams in his life rather than the real world. So I'm going to read this story out loud to the class. Class, make sure that you pay attention to all the story elements that we talked about earlier. Characters, setting, and plot. Some of you have original copies of the story and follow along with the highlighters you have. You're going to use yellow for characters, orange for setting, and green for important plot parts. We're going to wait till the end of the story to complete that part. So listen and follow along. We're going through, the commander's voice was like thin ice breaking. He wore his full dress uniform with a heavily braided white cap pulled down rakishly over one cold gray eye. We can't make it, sir. It's spoiling for a hurricane, if you ask me. I'm not asking you, Lieutenant Berg, said the commander. Throw on the lights. Rev her up to 8,500. We're going through. The pounding of the cylinders increased. The commander stared at the ice forming on the pilot window. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, he shouted. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, repeated Lieutenant Berg. The crew, bending to their various tasks in the huge, hurtling, 8-engine Navy hydroplane, looked at each other and grinned. The old man'll get us through, they said to one another. The old man ain't afraid of hell. Not so fast. You're driving too fast, said Mrs. Mitty. Why are you driving so fast for? Said Walter Mitty. He looked at his wife in the seat beside him with shocked astonishment. She seemed grossly unfamiliar, like a strange woman who had yelled at him in a crowd. You're up to 55, she said. You know I don't like it to go more than 40. You're up to 55. Walter Mitty drove on towards Waterbury in silence, the roaring of the SN-202 through the worst storm in 20 years of Navy, flying, fading in the remote, intimate airways of his mind. You're tensed up against him, Mrs. Mitty. It's one of your days. I wish you'd let Dr. Renshaw look you over. All right, so let's stop here, and quickly, let's add some things to our graphic organizer. So, Lauren, could you name me some of the characters you identified in that passage?
Sure. I found Commander, Lieutenant Berg, Mrs. Mitty, Walter Mitty, and Dr. Renshaw.
Perfect. Those are exactly the ones we've had listed. What settings did you have?
The Navy hydroplane, and Mitty's car, and Waterbury.
And Waterbury? Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure you got Waterbury as well. We don't know much about it, but that's why we're going to start asking questions. So now that we have these parts of the story identified, let's think, what did the author decide not to include in this story? So we're going to add these questions about the unknown backstory information under the questioning beyond the text. So what further questions do you have about the characters?
One question I had was, why does the commander want to get through the storm so badly?
Yeah, we're not really sure. He just kind of mentions he seems pretty excited and wants to get through the storm. I actually came up with a question myself as well. And you know what? She seems pretty bossy. So why is Mrs. Mitty so bossy? It's a great question, right?
That is a good question.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at setting. Do you have any questions about the setting?
Yes, I do. About the Navy plane,
Okay.
where is the Navy plane going?
That was never asked. Go on. Anything else? Do you know what a Navy plane is? I don't.
I don't.
All right, so let's add that to our list. We'll say, what is a Navy hydroplane?
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we would continue doing this through the rest of the story. It might take a little bit longer, but students will be able to follow along, and we'll be filling it out on the smartboard behind us. So the goal of this lesson is to have our students examine the depth of a short story. Students should be able to identify the story elements in any short story, looking for textual details about characters, setting, and plot. Next, students are going to use their investigative skills to think about what backstory information is not included as a story, just as Lauren here did, and ask questions about these identified story elements. How am I going to assess my students on this? I would assess my students through guided practice, through another short story, one that I picked out called The Old Man at the Bridge. And I'll be monitoring, walking around, and we'll also do some homework or independent practice where students will be asked to choose their own short story of their preference and analyze using the story elements we talked about, just as we had done all class. This is how I'm going to evaluate the completion of the objectives of this lesson. My objectives are to define a short story and its purpose in comparison to a novel, which we've done earlier in the class, identify the story elements of a short story, and lastly, extrapolate questions from information that was absent from the story. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed the lesson.